All right. So it's another IG Live for the word. Um, yeah, so I'll wait for people to chime on in. But this word was another interesting. Oh, look at that. Awesome. This week's word was another German word, hard to pronounce, but it's a very, very important word. It's Einfuhlung is the word of the week, and it's it's very important because it charts the beginning of the use of the word empathy in a lot of Western European society, and I think it's quite significant to think about it because empathy is just I think it's what's changing the face of America right now is I think more people are empathizing with the plight of African Americans and other people of color. And a fascinating thing with words is that when you hear a word, you learn a word, you it goes into your brain and you think that the word has always been there. But like as a person that like you just learned the word, so clearly like you had a perception of existence and how to live without that word being in it, and now that word's in your brain, and now it's hard to even think about what life was like without that word. And that happens at a macro level too, where whole societies will exist without really having a word that today we think of as being just common and normal. And Einfühlung is a word that kind of serves as this reminder. And so Einfühlung is it's a German word, and it means feeling into. And and from that word, the English created the word empathy. And Einfühlung was created in the late 1800s and didn't get translated into English until the early 1900s. So we're talking about a word that within like the English language is just over a century old. And I just think that that is so significant for everybody to think about, that this word empathy that we talk about all the time, that we understand the importance of it now, is actually a fairly new concept in the grand scheme of things for English speakers. And clearly, like that's like a hard thing for people to reconcile with, like the idea that empathy wasn't an idea that existed in the English speaking world prior to like 1909. But linguistically, the word didn't exist. A word that has existed for a very long time in the English speaking world is sympathy. But sympathy and empathy are quite different. And because sympathy, technically, like you could sympathize with anything and everything, but sympathy is an expectation of being able to like share feelings. So there's an emphasis on it being two like things, being able to sympathize. Like I can sympathize someone with someone who has gone through something that I've gone through. That's a very that's a foundational concept of sympathy. But empathy, you're kind of feeling into something that you know, an experience that you haven't gone through, and you're imagining and putting yourself in that place. And so there's a big difference between sympathy and empathy. And a lot of European thought, English thought, had an emphasis on sympathizing, and that's and sympathy becomes very insufficient when you spend time othering the rest of the world and making dehumanizing people, making things seem like they're different than you. Then sympathy can't stretch to that. Empathy is now the thing that needs to reach um, these people and places that have been othered. And so Einfühlung, I think, just gives us a great reminder of how new empathy is in the society in which we live, and how as we think about making a better society, how empathy is key to that, because we know the value of it now, but we live in a place where the institutions and norms to a large extent didn't have empathy as a foundational component. And so that's like the intro for the word. If any of you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. I can clearly talk about about the word for quite a bit. But if Jackie or oh yeah, Jessica just signed up. Awesome. Is there a difference between the word and empathy? Um, so like no, yes and no. Like Einfuhlung is the word that empathy was translated from. So like I guess the difference, the slight difference you could say is that like when Einfuhlung was first coined in like the 1800s, the focus was on feeling into like inanimate objects. So like you would feel into a painting, or you'd feel into some sort of piece of art or a building, and it was like talking about how something inanimate can invoke an emotion. You can like pour your heart into it. So there's a concept, an emphasis on Einfühlung, that the feeling like extends beyond human beings. I think a lot of times when we talk about empathy, it's to extend your emotions into someone or some group of people who have been classified as an other, and so it's more of like a greater emphasis on human to human interactions. Um, but I think Einfühlung actually kind of gives that capacity to take it one step further, even though like it's the same words. Like the words are the same, but from culture to culture, there will be like nuances that distinguish how it's perceived. And so, I think like learning that the word empathy originated from feeling into a painting or a plant, or a piece of art, kind of makes you think about how your application of empathy as a human being can be that you empathize with a plant, you could empathize with a tree, you could empathize with a piece of art, and like it kind of reinforces the idea of having stuff in your house that makes you feel good, that like a part of your heart or soul is like in it, even though it's not necessarily alive in a human sense. So having art in your house that evokes that feeling would be great. Having plants and all these other things to help you empathize, I think is really key. And so I guess that might be the best like distinction, where it allows you to it encourages you to think about empathizing in a way that's beyond just empathizing with your fellow human being. And tragically, due to our society being based on so much division, we kind of have to do like step one empathy of empathizing with the people who have been othered in America, and then you can do the other kind. You can go to that next step, and you could also say like a lot of people, and this is an annoyance in the U.S., but like right now as we talk about George Floyd, there are so many African Americans that get killed too soon and unjustly by police and vigilantes or whatnot. But America also is this place where like if an animal gets hurt, then people will lose it and talk about how outrageous that is. Like that feeling, that connection to an animal is a very good connection to have. But if you have that connection to like an animal but you don't have that connection to a human being, then you are living in a really weird place where like your empathy is being undermined, and misguided and misdirected. And so I think that's how they could be slightly different, but it's more of just how each culture applies the word. But the word itself means Einfühlung and empathy mean the same thing. Good question, Jackie. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, let's see. So, one thing that I was thinking of regarding this word this week, and granted, I've really. Okay, let's see. I wonder if there was a big difference or enlightenment in society when empathy was first created in English. It's a really good question. And I'll say, like, I am not sure if there was a big like societal change, because we're talking, but and it's not because empathy wasn't important, but we're talking England 1909, like right around that time. Europe then decided to start blowing itself up and had World War One and World War Two, and so there wasn't there really was no empathy extended to to the Germans, or in World War One or World War Two, and rightfully so. No, well, not rightfully so. That's a bit harsh, but there really wasn't empathy as like a guiding force in society. But it's really interesting to think about how after all the destruction that Europe created, inflicted upon itself, social programs like universal health care, all that kind of stuff became like a big component of European life, making sure that everyone had services, and they created the European Union so people could move more freely throughout the countries. They could trade, essentially get to know each other, and create those bonds, which is like a practice of empathizing with your fellow European, so that you would be less inclined to wage war against a person that you've forged, a culture that you forged an emotional connection with. And so I wouldn't say that like 1909 brought about like an enlightenment across Europe regarding empathy, because they then proceeded to like try to blow themselves up. But after all that destruction, they definitely started trying to create structures to prevent that destruction. And I think that is also like a manifestation of empathy, even if it maybe came about in a reactionary way. So Jessica, is it a natural instinct or is it more learned? Oh, it's definitely a learned thing. Like it's a practice. Like I think one of the key things about empathy is like you have to articulate how it's beneficial for a society or for a person to have it, because everything, to be honest, I think it's very hard to articulate that almost anything that we do is just like an innate learned human thing that we just get without any sort of instruction. Our environment shapes us radically. The language we speak is not something that we have a choice over. Like if we lived in an Asian country that had been practicing Buddhism for ages, empathy would have been like a key part of our vocabulary for like the beginning of our existence. But if you've learned English and you live in America, like it's something that you're probably gonna learn when in like your teens. So no, it's definitely something that you have to learn, and it's something that you have to practice. And to practice something and learn something, you have to articulate why it's beneficial to do it. And clearly, if you can see yourself in another person, it'll make it more likely that you won't want to harm that person, which is quite good. Which if they can do that too, that it makes it more and less likely that they're going to want to harm you too. And now both of you are safer. And so yeah, you have to. So the key thing is like understanding that like empathy is a essential tool for making like your society a safe place. So how do you do that with a 5-year-old? It's a good question. So I don't have a 5-year-old, so I can't give like a straight example like this is what you do. But I will say, like, my mom told me this story a little while ago about how when I was a kid, she had to make me more empathetic. And like it's funny because she definitely did, and it's changed me. Like when I was younger, as a little kid, I could watch horror movies all day and just thought they were like entertaining because I didn't really like feel the pain of the people, even though like it's fake, you know. I just didn't get that like bad things were happening. It was just entertaining things happening. Um, and I also like doing karate, and so I would kick people because I thought it was fun. And so my mom would sit me down and tell me like a story to make me feel as bad as like the other person felt when I did something to them that I just thought was fun. I didn't have like an awareness that this was bad per se. And so like by telling a story and doing, articulating a telling a story and helping someone see and feel how other people felt, like that's a practice, and that's how you can do it to get people to have more empathy. And like I remember it was like elementary school. I think my mom came to my elementary school and like taught about race, and she did it by just saying like there are purple people and green people. And it was really easy for like little kids to you know attach themselves to purple people and green people. And then if, all these bad things are happening to the purple people because of the green people, it becomes very easy to be like, oh, that you shouldn't do that to the purple people. This is, I can feel bad for, all that kind of stuff. Like little exercises like that help people develop empathy, but it's a practice. And like, like America's a very interesting place in that we always want, and the terminology we use is bad, but we always say something like a silver bullet or like a quick fix or like a one-stop shop. You just go someplace or do something once or for a month and it fixes like your problems forever. Like that just doesn't exist. That's just not real. What you need is to create practices that you can consistently do things that you're quite sure are beneficial for yourself and society, and that will make you and your environment better. And practicing empathy through storytelling and forming like emotional connections with other people is a key way to do that. And so no, you just have to teach it. And for a 5-year-old, you just tell them stories. Would I mind sharing with people my own practice of empathy? Uh, yeah, I guess. Like, so it's funny. I don't think I have like a particular thing I do every day to like empathize, to like like I meditate and do stuff like that every day, but like my meditation practice isn't to like cultivate empathy. But like one thing I do think about is I think about other people a lot. I think I don't spend that much time thinking about myself because like I'm just myself. So I'm not sure how much extra thought I need to do, because the more thought I do, I'm still myself. The less thought I do, I'm still myself. So let's think about something else. And so by thinking about other people and how other people feel or think, or you know, I think that's a pretty key practice that helps me have empathy. Um, Also, like I focus a lot on language, as you guys know, clearly the word, and so I think about how I need to phrase things for particular people. Like I don't adhere to the idea that like I can just speak the same way to any person and it resonates the same way. Like if I'm talking out loud to someone, I'm clearly trying to say a particular thing, and that could be that I would like a particular response. Say like I'm telling a joke. Like if I'm gonna say something that I think is funny, I want to say it in a way that will like make someone laugh. And so I think the act of thinking about how you talk to other people is also like a key practice on empathy, because you have to like think about that other person um, prior to saying anything. And so I think there's a lot of, like, and if you, and I guess the key thing is like I don't enjoy engaging in conversations with the purpose of like dominating other people. Like if the goal is to like dominate, then you're not going to think about the other person as like a person. You're going to think about like their weaknesses or how forceful you can be, and it becomes like a weird competition. And I don't try to think like that. So if I'm trying to forge like equitable conversations with people, then that also like creates a practice. So here we go, Jessica. Let's see. You think there's a correlation between societies that prioritize arts and the word? Uh, yeah, no, I definitely yes. I think I think so. Like empathy, I think is a key component to the formation of culture, and you could also say like sympathy is that too. It just has a much lower ceiling where like you aren't trying to create that emotional connection with anything that you call an other. Empathy allows for like that growth to create culture and to celebrate like like the metaphysical, the untangible parts of a person, like their emotions. And so with that comes art. And by encouraging people to cultivate art, by expressing themselves, and then by having a word for people who didn't make the art to like express themselves by feeling into art, I think that's very significant. And also, like we're talking about Germany here, so like with Einfuhlung we are like they have a very strong connection to the forest and their environment in many ways, and so that's also like environmentalism I think has a connection to empathy. So to arts and all that kind of stuff. If you look at the U.S., in many ways our society is just super industrialized, which is clearly not founded on like caring about workers and laborers and like their time and all that kind of stuff. And you can see the sterility of like a lot of our buildings, and how graffiti and other types of art is viewed negatively in a lot of parts of the U.S. because it might be covering over like the a wall that's really ugly and boring, but that some company owns because the company matters more than people in over here. And so yeah, no, I definitely think art and empathy kind of go together without a doubt. So like I don't want to empathize with Trump supporters or racist people, but maybe it's necessary. Well, so yeah, like so I guess a key thing with empathy is like being able to empathize with someone doesn't necessarily mean that you want to hang out with them or that you're gonna decide that they're a good person. Like like so so let's say you are a Trump supporter or someone is a Trump person, and they have been fed a narrative of America being this amazing place that like white people just get X, Y, and Z, and they get to do whatever they want because they own the place and they have property, and it's just like you just you literally can get away with murder, and they've been told that this is good and they can do it their entire life, and their grandparents and great grandparents were like really great people is what they've been told. If that's all you know, and all you know is something that's really bad and a lie, dealing with the truth is going to be really difficult. It's going to be hard. You're probably not going to want to do it. You're probably going to want to fight hard to like keep the right to be like a horrible person while thinking that you're fighting to be a good person. So like I think we should be able to empathize with people have been who've been lied to forever and have formed like an emotional attachment to these horrible lies, and they're just awful people. But the goal by empathizing shouldn't mean that you want to give them a platform to like spew their gibberish and their horrible ideas. It's just you should be able to say, "Man, that's tough. That's really rough. I'd hate to be like that. Like, I'd hate for that to be my reality." And I think that's an adequate amount of empathy. Like I'll say, like this is like a weird thing, but I'm from the South, and so there's a lot of like I grew up with a lot of Republican people, and most of them wouldn't ever have even thought in a million years that they were racist people or anything negative. And a lot of them are just like super friendly and nice. But then if you start talking to them about things that matter, their logic just falls apart. And it's just like a nightmare of what's it's just like it's just so bad. And but they genuinely believe that what they were saying is really good, and they've been taught their entire life that what they're saying wasn't insane. I always felt bad for them. I was like, man, that's awful. That's horrible. Like, I don't want to be your friend and I don't want to hang out with you, but I feel bad for you. But I'll say one thing that's really interesting is I never really would ever talk about them or to them as if they were like the devil or or like in a dehumanizing way. It was just, I think your policies are dangerous and really bad, and I don't think they make any sense. And this, strangely enough, would always have like conservatives want to talk to me more because I didn't just try to dehumanize them. Um, and that's fascinating because we never would ever agree with anything, but they didn't feel like I dehumanized them, and I think that's key. Like another thing that's also really interesting now is like there's a lot of white people, especially following George Floyd, that aren't conservative, that are like liberals, progressives, and they want to be allies and helpful, but they don't know how to do it because like America's really never taught them how to be helpful to African Americans, and they've never really had to sit and think about how like their grandparents or maybe even their parents are just like really bad people that the thing to do might be to not associate with them anymore. Like they haven't had to think about that type of stuff, and now they do. And I think about how tough that probably is, where like as a black person, I'm never going to have that dilemma. Like I'm going to have plenty of other stuff to worry about, and that's stuff that like other people have created to just try to make my life worse. But it's not that like I've come from like lines and lines of people who have like intentionally tried to make my own life worse and our family's life worse by dehumanizing other people and having like bad beliefs. This is something that white people have to deal with, and that's really tough. So I have empathy for that. That doesn't mean that I think that their ideas are going to be better or like they have more merit, but like no, like that's key. Like I was telling someone the other day, if I go as a black person, if I look in the past, all I'm gonna find is a bunch of hardworking, underappreciated black people that were getting terrorized. But there's not gonna be one person in my family that I'm gonna say, man, this is a horrible person who like committed atrocities and I can't be friends with them. Like that's just really slim. That's the likelihood of that happening is just like zero. But for like white Americans, the likelihood of that being part of their narrative is a lot, and that's rough. And I have empathy for that, but that doesn't mean that I want them to make the decisions. I hope that answered your question, Jackie. It was kind of long. Um, uh, yeah. So Jessica, like you empathizing with people and understanding. It's I bet like a simple answer is like in high school, I was like really good at math, and so I would like tutor kids in math. And math is always a great example for a lot of stuff because you have to show your work. So even if if a person, everyone, no one tries to get a math problem wrong. Some do. I guess some people probably do, but most likely, people try to get the answer right, and they'll show their work, and at some point they'll mess up or just you know do something and it'll be wrong. And you look at this person, and for some reason they did their math wrong, and they got the wrong answer, and they're gonna get a zero. As a person who's here to tutor them and teach them math, I totally empathize with their plight of trying to get that right answer. It's like, that sucks. I get it. I can't, if I looked at that person and said, you're less of a person, action. if I looked at that person and said that you aren't like a human being, you're subhuman because you got this math problem wrong, and I'm like a superior human being, then like I wouldn't be able to help them get their math problems correct, you know. So I empathize with them as they got all the problems wrong, and by empathizing and learning, seeing what they did, I was able to like show them how to get their math problems correct, get them right. Real simple. But because I empathize with them, that doesn't mean that for a millisecond, I thought it made sense for them to teach me math. Like, at no point did I ever think that they should teach me math or be in a position to teach anybody math. And so with like Trump supporters and all these other people, like I can empathize with them, but at no point does that mean that I want to listen or follow what they say or put them in a position where they could, teach the equivalent of math. It's like, no, everything you're saying is wrong. It's awful. It's dangerous. It's bad for society. I can empathize as to why you might come to this conclusion and think this way. But that doesn't mean that I'm gonna let you like teach people. That would be horrible. And so math I think is a good example. So yeah, you can empathize with them, but just don't give them the authority to try to teach you how to do stuff unless we all want to be bad at math. And what would be the point in that? Or just to continue at bad people. So yeah, but I think a key thing right now about Einfuhlung and empathy is just to think about how, like, as America was being built and colonization was happening, like, empathy just didn't exist in the English language. So it wasn't a concept that they could even extend to indigenous people or extend to African American, African people, or extend to anybody, because it wasn't a concept that existed. And if you just look at the fabrics of our society and how we've tried to normalize division and neglect and exploitation and just the othering of everything, like not even just the othering of people, but like the environment is an other in the US in many ways. And art is not really as celebrated an artist struggle here financially, like more than a lot of other industrialized, westernized nations, because they don't have as much government support. You can see like it's due to a lack of empathy, and I think now as people try to, we live in this globalized environment where you can talk to more people, you can meet more people from all sorts of different walks of life. It's harder for people to be an other, and so it's easier to see the benefit of having empathy. Now, does that mean that you end up practicing it and do stuff to like cultivate it? I don't know. That's that each person has to figure out how they cultivate it, but the inclination to have empathy, I think, is even greater now. And so we need to really understand that as we try to make things better in our society. And I think these George Floyd protests are a really good example of that, of empathizing a lot, and how that empathy is spreading across society, across the world. And so yeah. You guys have any more questions? But yeah, I think as progressives in society, we're going to find it cultivating empathy for like the white Americans who want to be our allies and create bonds with communities of color is going to be like a really big thing, because for some people it'll be really easy for them to acknowledge that like a lot of things need to go away. Some it might be hard because they're just so accustomed to them being here, but that's key. And so awesome. Well, if no one has any questions, Naderism's joined right at the end. But if anybody has any more, if no one has any more questions, we'll wrap this one up. But if you do, just drop them in, and perfect. Naderisms, ask a question. It's if yeah, but but yeah, empathy's huge right now. It's really, really significant, and I think the connection that the world and America showing, like George Floyd's also, you know, like you could see the video. It was nearly 9 minutes of a person's life getting taken away, and I think it's quite easy for people to see themselves as if they were George Floyd, and and I think that makes it easier for people to have empathy because they can see themselves in that person a little easier. And then the language he used is the language of Eric Gardner and a lot of people. And so, yeah, it's significant right now. And yes, and we will need to teach a lot of white Americans the importance of empathy. And I think we need to teach all Americans it because it's not something that we've prioritized as a society. Yes, and that's kind of the foundation. That's key. Like that they need to start looking at life from a lens not their own. Like, and that's the practice. Like having empathy is practicing trying to view the world from another perspective, and that that's what happens when you feel into Einfuhlung. When you feel into something, you you get to be able to view the world from another way, or you get to have like a piece of you in something else. It's kind of like they won't necessarily this is empathy, but like when people have kids, they always talk about how it's kind of like you have your heart in like another person, and they're out going around, and he's like there's like a vulnerability to that, and it's difficult. That's the process of feeling into where like if something bad happens to a person that you don't know but you felt into, you then should feel bad. um, and so that's part of empathy. And so it's you can try to see clearly. Seeing and feeling, they go hand in hand, and it's a practice of cultivating that within yourself so that you can care about the people and the things that are around you. Because at the end of the day, if you don't care about the stuff that's around you, then it's going to be really hard to care about yourself, because like we aren't islands. The things that are around us shape us and influence us. And so making sure that we make sure that the things that are around us and have that consciousness of our environment is key to being healthy. And that's all empathy. That's it. And you have to have the language, and you have to cultivate practices to sustain that and spread it. And so this week's word was essentially empathy, and raising awareness of like how new that word is. And like one thing that's also interesting, and I have this in the newsletter, but like in German, the word to that means to empathize is Einfühlen. And so people had said that casually, and so like casually speaking something is one thing, but then putting it on paper and having like thorough analysis and discussion, that helps elevate the discussion where it can become something that is more easy to translate or to spread. And so like there's so many levels of language, and so like it's like it'd be crazy to say that there weren't people who spoke English who didn't feel empathy for other people. Of course there were, but if you don't have like the word written down and analysis and articulating why at a macro level this is good for a lot of people, then it makes it harder for it to become something that like transforms a society. And just like a lot of the work that we do at SCL is the theory is that there are these feelings that everyone has, but like an absence of language to articulate those feelings. And so that absence of language makes you feel like that there's a void, or that it undermines you would be more inclined to undermine the legitimacy of your feeling if you don't know how to say it or write it or explain it. And so and the German paper in 1870 took this concept of empathy to like a new level where people could provide analysis and think about it and make it a macro thing that you could then translate it into other languages and people use it at scale. And like that's just really, really significant. And at the cultures that like Buddhism that really prioritize empathy quite a bit, like there was an effort of putting it on paper, documenting it, then creating practices so that people could do it like in a structured macro and micro way for hundreds and hundreds of years. And like that's yeah, exactly. When you write it down and think about it, it's no longer a reflex. And so like that's the key thing. Like definitely people have that reflex for empathy, but if you're wanting to do something for a long time, you got to write it down. You got to make a practice. And the practice could be that you say, I'm going to do this at this time every day for 15 minutes. But it could also be like it's just in your mind and you think about it throughout the course of your day quite a bit. And that becomes like a whole new practice that just like instills. And I think with regards to empathy, my practice is a bit more like that. I just spend more time thinking about other people than I probably do thinking about myself. And that is in and of itself like a practice in empathy, because Nativisms, you got here a little late, but like no matter how much I think about myself, I'm still just going to be myself. So I should spend more time thinking about other things, because you're always gonna be yourself. So let's imagine what other stuff is like. And so yeah, but I think unless anyone has any other questions, I think this was a good episode, and we covered a lot. And as the protest and everything, the societal change is happening regarding George Floyd, kind of look at it as an expansion of empathy in the U.S., where we're recognizing that a lot of our structures, our language, everything were built around not having empathy for the existence and plight of Black people in this country. And that also clearly extends to Indigenous people too, and other people of color. And now at scale, we're recognizing that if we are to empathize with people of color, then there's going to need to be some radical changes in American society. And let's make those changes, and clearly those changes will be better than what we have, because what we have are based around not having empathy and othering people in perpetuity, and that's ethnocidal and not good at all. So yeah, well, hey, thanks everyone for coming. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate it. And subscribe to the Word, get it in your email every Sunday, and stay in touch with everything SCL. And also, we now are selling some cool prints. So if you check out our IG, we have some links for you where you can buy prints. So talk to you later, and have a great day. Bye.